Games.com. Let's write an initial class enemy here and see how all the little pieces fit together. One thing I do want to keep in mind here is, remember, you're dealing with simple variables and methods. Keep that in mind. So let's look at writing a specific class here and what goes into it. First up is our public class enemy, or the header of our class. I've highlighted also the curly braces here to show you that if you are going to be part of the class, you have to be between those two curly braces. I've also added a comment near the end curly brace at the bottom, end class enemy. I usually put that in when I'm writing a class, so I know exactly where to put code that I want to be part of my class and therefore part of my object. Again, this public class enemy line will be fairly consistent from different programs. The only thing that generally changes is the name of the class. Give the name of your class a descriptive name. Again, we're building something here that represents something that's dangerous to the main character of our game. An enemy could be anything that hurts our main character. Variables. Here are the variables that I've decided to declare as my enemy class. The X position and Y position will describe where the enemy is located on the screen. X and Y coordinates of the enemy on the screen. This will determine whether it's at the top of the screen, the middle of the screen, or the bottom of the screen. The health variable describes the health of that enemy variable. Since it is an enemy, we assume we're trying to kill it. If it has a high health value like 100, it means it's at full health. If it has a low health value like 0, it means it's dead. In order to write a class, we need to declare some variables, and these are the three that I've decided for now should be part of the enemy class. As I said, we also have to write methods. Methods to define what the object does. So I'm going to build three methods here. One's called a constructor method, another's called a set method, and another one's called a get method. I don't have a lot of room. This is not going to be the full enemy class. I just wanted to give you a taste of the variables and methods that I would describe in building this class. Looking closer at what's called the constructor method. Constructors build objects. Who takes a blueprint and builds a house? Construction workers. Who takes a class definition and builds an object? Constructor methods. See, there's no mystery to the naming of a constructor. It helps build the object. And since we're in the class enemy, this is going to help build an enemy object. This is what's known as the default constructor. It's going to set X and Y position to 0, 0, or the top left of the screen. And it's going to set health to 100. 100, as I'm defining it, is full health. 0 is going to be dead. When the enemy reaches 0 health, it's going to be dead. Next up is what we call a set method, or a setter. Set methods, or setters, put values in objects. Objects hold variables. Objects hold data. And whenever I want to put a new value inside the object, I call what's called a set method, or a setter. This set X position method is going to provide a new value for the X coordinate. I don't have room to show all the set methods, but typically we write a set method for all the variables. So there'll be a set X position, a set Y position, and a set health variable. I don't have room to do it all now, but I'm just showing you the example of a set method. And remember, set methods put values in objects. Next up is a get method, or a getter. Get methods pull values from objects. Objects hold variables or data, and when I want to pull a piece of information out of an object, I call a get method, sometimes called a getter. This one is going to return the current value of the X position variable. If X position contains a 0, then this will return a 0 to the caller of get X position. Now this should become more clear when we start using the enemy class and building objects out of it. So let's write a little code here to create an enemy object and use that enemy object. A class creates a new variable type. That's important to understand. You're used to variable types like int, double, and char. When you create a class enemy, you're building a new enemy type. So what I'm going to do here is declare a variable of type enemy named object. So let's run this code to create an object. Remember, the class is the blueprint for creating the object. So what we're going to show is taking that blueprint and building an object out of it. I'm going to go very slowly on this first line of code and show you all the little pieces that take place here. There's about 3 different steps that are going on this one little line of code. First up, we're creating an enemy variable named object. This is called a reference variable. Variables created out of classes are called reference variables, and that first part of the line that I've got underlined in red here is declaring the variable of type enemy named object. So I'm going to show you the object variable first because that's what this part of the line of code does, declare the enemy object. Then I'm going to go over to the other side and see where it says new enemy. This is the piece of code that creates the enemy object. The new literally means allocate me a new piece of memory, and then the enemy that follows it, enough memory for an enemy object. Also notice the curly braces here at the end of enemy here. We're calling the constructor We're calling the constructor method over here. See the curly braces on the constructor methods? See the curly braces over on this side? What we're doing is we are building a new enemy object and calling the constructor method of the enemy object. So let's go execute the constructor method of the enemy object. You can see it sets x position to 0, and I put a 0 in the x position variable. Next, the constructor sets y position equal to 0, so I assign a 0 to the y position of the enemy object. And finally, I decided by default I want the health value to be 100. When a brand new enemy object is created, it should be at full health, 100. And I assign 100 to the health variable of the enemy object. Remember, an object is just variables and methods, and what I'm doing is making sure those variables are initialized with proper values. Notice where the underline is. It's underneath the equal sign. Right now, I'm showing you what happens when this equal sign. See that enemy object that we created on the right side? I want to assign it to my object reference variable. The variable object is a reference to an instance of the enemy. This line here that creates the object to the reference variable, that was created by this equal sign. I want to assign the object I created to the reference variable, object. I know it's a literal name, but object is a reference to an enemy, and we're connecting the object to the reference in that equal sign. Now let's use that object reference to call a method. Go to the reference object, and the dot says go inside that object and execute a method. This particular method we're going to execute is called setXPosition. So go to the reference variable, the dot says go inside of it, and execute the setXPosition, passing it a value of 50 as the argument for the parameter. So a 50 comes in and that 50 that we passed is assigned to the xPosition variable. So what I'm doing, as I said earlier, the set methods put values in objects. So the 50 that was passed as a parameter is then inserted or assigned to the global variable xPosition. And that's all a set method does. So let's drop to the next line of code. We'll declare an int x variable. This is a variable declaration. Int is a type, x is the variable of that type. So I've drawn the x variable down here. Then I will execute the other side of that equal statement and say object.getXPosition. Go to the object reference, the dot says go inside of it, and then let's access the getXPosition method inside the object. Well, what does the getXPosition do? Getters pull values from objects. So all it's going to do is take that 50 that was assigned to xPosition and return it to the user. When it returns the 50, the value of xPosition to the user, what does it do with it? The equal sign says assign the 50 that got returned to the x variable, and you can see because of that equal sign, that 50 got inserted into the object. Do you see what I did there? All I did is take a 50 and take it from outside the object and put it inside the object with the setXPosition. I then turned around and pulled that 50 right back out with the getXPosition and assigned it to the variable x. And that's pretty much what an object does. You put values into an object, you pull values out of the object. There is our simple, straightforward enemy object. This is by no means intended to be a full implementation of a class enemy. Enemies are much more complicated than this, but I think it fits nicely on the screen and shows you the basic operation of an object. We have to allocate space for the object, put values into the object, and pull values out of the object.
GameSci.com